This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman as we continue our coverage of the first anniversary of Superstorm Sandy. Many of those impacted by the storm remain homeless and dependent on diminishing relief funds. New York Magazine reports at least 22,000 households are still displaced. Joining us here in our New York studio, which a year ago there was no power here or anywhere else. In fact, Democracy Now!, I was on the road on 100 city tour. We were in St. Louis. All the media was watching St. Louis yesterday for the Red Sox Cardinals game. Red Sox won, but that wasn't what was important a year ago. So as I was broadcasting from a St. Louis PBS station, my colleagues here in New York were going out to the Rockaways, to Brooklyn, to Queens, to Staten Island, to the Lower East Side, because the whole area was devastated. We're joined here by Sean Little, a healthcare worker who lived in the Rockaways section of Queens when Sandy hit. She and her family have been living in hotels for the past year. We're also joined by Judith Goldner, attorney in charge of the Civil Law Reform Unit at the Legal Aid Society. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Judith, let's begin with you. Give us the overall picture of housing today, a year after Superstorm Sandy.
Well, unfortunately, what we saw with Superstorm Sandy is it destroyed a whole area of low-income housing for people that has not been replaced. And in fact, the housing that's been rebuilt in places like the Rockaways is now unaffordable to a lot of people who used to live there. So what we've seen is losing this category of housing and not rebuilding so that people who live there can afford to go back. We at Legal Aid have been representing people who were homeless and in the hotels for, really since the storm, and trying to make sure that they at least are going to get permanent affordable housing. But really the bigger picture is that so many people still don't have housing, are marginally housed, are doubled up, are in hotels, and we don't have good options for them.
What do you mean that many houses were wiped out? And then how was it set up? How was the building done so that people with lower incomes could not go back?
Well, many times people who were able to rebuilt and started charging more rent than people could afford for those apartments. Some apartments weren't rebuilt, and there was many less options, especially in places like Far Rockaway. And we've been hearing over and over how people are seeing rents that are far, far higher than they ever were. And remember, Far Rockaway was a place where there was affordable housing. It's pretty far away from Manhattan. It takes a long time to get there, and as a result, many of my clients could actually find places to live there, and that's not the case anymore.
Sean Little, explain what happened to you. Where were you a year ago, before the Superstorm Sandy?
I was home in the Rockaways, Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what happened when the storm hit? You had Irene, but nothing really had happened.
And nothing happened. So basically, we was unprepared because we figured it was the same. It was going to be the same. So Irene, I was ready and prepared, but nothing happened. So Sandy just took us back. We wasn't prepared, and we didn't prepare for anything. So we was there, and we evacuated eventually. And we ended up in a gymnasium in Kew Gardens.
For about 10 days or so?
10 days.
And then where'd they put you?
They put us in the shelter in the Bronx. We went to the shelter in the Bronx for a few days. And then from there, we went to the hotels.
And what hotels were they putting you in? And for people who have kids, their kids are supposed to be in school. I mean, that's...
Sure. Well, people was traveling. They was back and forth, to the Rockaways, to different parts of Queens. They offered different schools to place the kids in, if you rather that. My son was not able to go back to school because his school was in the Rockaways.
How old is he?
He's 15 now. He was 14 then. So he went to Beach Channel. And they're on the bay in the Rockaways, Rockaway Park. So he was out of his school for like 4 months.
And you're still in a hotel today?
Yes, I'm in a different hotel, actually. We just relocated to Brooklyn from Manhattan, which is a blessing. It's okay, I'm here.
And how do you get out of a hotel and actually live in an apartment or a home?
Well, now I'm getting ready to relocate. Actually, I'll be moving in my new place in a few weeks or so. With the grace of legal aid, helped us out. DHS helped us out.
You have an autistic foster child?
Right, I do.
How did he bear this?
Well, as long as he was with me, he was fine. You know, anything other probably would have set him back. You know, he came a long way. And, you know, to keep him where he is today, as long as he's with his family, you know, me, myself, me, my son, my daughter, that's all he knows. So he's doing great.
So, Judith Goldner, how typical is this? A year later, people still living in hotels?
Well, we are still working with 80 households, about 150 people who are still in the hotels. Unfortunately, the city has not moved quickly to give many of those people the housing assistance that they need in order to move in. We worked very hard with Ms. Little, and we were able to get her a housing coupon, but there are many others for whom the city has not acted yet. And despite our efforts, they're still slow, and it's really concerning to us.
New York Magazine says 22,000 people are still displaced.
Right. There are 80 people still in the hotels. There are 22,000 people.
Households. That's more than even people.
Right. 22,000 households who are still doubled up, tripled up, living in substandard conditions. Absolutely. There's so many people like that. And there's been so little effort to make more housing available to them.
What do you think is the most important issue for people to understand right now?
How little affordable housing there is. We knew that in New York City before, but Superstorm Sandy really illuminated how little housing there is for people who really need it.
Do you foresee being able to move into back into an apartment or in a house, Sean?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. As long as I'm comfortable, I basically have what I was used to, I'm fine. You know, it was times where they try to place us in, you know, places that we wasn't used to. You know, we didn't come from. You know, I worked hard to get my family in a middle-class home. I had no program, no public assistance, you know, and, you know, to just lose that and go somewhere that we're not used to would have been really, really hard, you know.
We're going to have to leave it there, but we will certainly continue to follow this. Judith Goldner, attorney at Legal Aid Society. Sean Little, displaced from her home in Rockaways when Hurricane Sandy hit a year ago today. That does it for our broadcast.